There are 5 really great notebook scenarios, from documentation, collaboration, operationalization, notebooks as UX, and notebooks for data workflows. My name is Alan Yu, and I'm a program manager in the SQL Tools and Experiences team.
And I'm Julie Koesmarno. I am a program manager in the SQL Tools and Experiences team. This is Azure Data Studio Notebooks Power Hour. So back a few years ago, before I joined the Azure Data Studio team or the SQL Tools and Experiences team, I used to be in the business analytics team, so I worked with a lot of SQL scripts. Now, you know what? That was actually the beginning of my journey with notebooks. I wrote a lot of SQL scripts that was unmanageable, and now all those SQL scripts in the closet have become reproducible analysis in notebooks. Remember those days, Alan?
Yes, I do.
So right now I'm going to show you how to get started with notebooks based on my experience as a SQL person. All right, there are simple ways of creating a new notebook. So from the welcome page, you can click on new and new notebook. But you can also go to your database connection. So for example, I've got one here connecting to demo wide world importers database. So if I right click on it, I can choose new notebook. Now from here, you'll see that a notebook has been created and it's actually have a SQL kernel connected to it. And then it's attached to the database that I'm intending to write a query against. All right, let me just minimize this and go through the next steps. All right, in notebooks, there are 2 types of cells. The first one is a text cell and the other one is a code cell. So text cell is actually really useful for you to write comments or analysis. So remember, this is part of the kind of like reproducible analysis, right? So if you're not familiar with Markdown, you can simply switch to a rich text view. So again, I'm going to a split view to see the Markdown version and the preview on the right. All right, since I'm familiar with Markdown, so I as well just continue with Markdown here. So I'll just type in my first SQL query. And that's it. That's a text cell already. Now I can add a new cell or a new code cell to be specific. So as an example, I can add a select statement like this, select top 10 stuff from, let's take a look at the information schema tables table. So when I run this, it's essentially just writing or running a query. So from here, you can, obviously save as CSV or JSON, etc. But you can also create a chart from it too. So very, very handy. So if I save this notebook and share it with you as an example, you'll be able to see the text, the code, and the results. So it's super handy. And as part of the kind of like the notebook here, I can simply kind of provide my analysis as at the time that I was creating it. When I share that with you, obviously, you can see, that result set. And if I want to, I can rerun this notebook and compare it with, my previous result, obviously. So that's kind of, to me, a key winner of a notebook. Earlier, I mentioned reproducible analysis or reproducible research. So I do want to get through an example of that. That way you get a more of a feel of what notebook can be really, really good for, especially for the SQL people. So here's one that I've prepared earlier, which is a marketing experimentation analysis, and it's connected to the wide world importers database. Now, from this notebook, if I scroll down a little bit, you can see the abstract as well as introduction. So essentially that gives the business context of what the business is about. It talks about the method of the analysis, which is super useful for somebody else who's completely new and having to kind of read this paper, right? Okay, now let's jump to the code bit. So over here, I documented the step obviously to connect to the database, which is super handy. And then now to the code bit. Now this is probably something similar or familiar to you. It's just essentially a SQL statement. So what I'm doing here is just doing a select top 10 rows from the tables that we will be using today, and I've done some kind of fancy joining as well. So yeah, so I think we can give this a go. If I click run, it should simply run the that statement. Now there is a button here that I quite like. If I want to collapse code, I can do that, and that way, if I'm simply interested in the results, I don't have to bother with the code. I can just collapse it, or I can expand it if I want to do that after as well. And there's this button on the top here, right? That is called collapse cells. So I can collapse all of them. Now all of the code is now collapsed, and so that way it's easy for me to navigate to the results. So yeah. So this is a good example of a reproducible analysis. It goes through the steps, and then let me just scroll all the way down. That's the third step. There you go. This is the conclusion. So the conclusion, I actually wrote it in text in terms of, what the analysis produced. And that way the business folks who actually want to read this can grab the essence of the analysis. And on top of that, I've also included a chart here. So this chart is actually created based on a SQL query. So let me just scroll up here. I collapsed it earlier. So it's just a SQL query that I, ran previously in the notebook. And because I saved the notebook with the result set, it saves the outcome or the result set as well as the chart. Yeah. So this is a great example of reproducible research. Now you're probably wondering, is there a good template for it? Well, I have created a template which looks something like this. So this is essentially extracting the essence of reproducible analysis, where I put in the abstract, introduction, assumptions, data sets, describe data sets that we're using, the steps, and then the conclusion, any appendix or the references that you want to throw in there. Now, I know some of you are coming from SQL world, are not just data analyst or database developer, I suppose. Some of you are probably coming from sort of like a DBA sort of world. Now, there is a template as well for troubleshooting guide here, where essentially, the steps are kind of almost similar to the analysis one, where it gives you kind of, overview. And then obviously for troubleshooting, it's good to know, what kind of symptoms would you see if you want to execute this troubleshooting guide, and then the mitigation steps, and then the verification. And then after that, the communication. It's always good to communicate how to fix or the impact of the mitigation or the impact of the issues, and the appendix and references.
Alan, I'm so glad that I've moved to notebooks, because now my reproducible analysis in notebooks become more actionable. It seems that you have more news recently on notebooks. Alan, can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I'm just so glad that you tried out Azure Data Studio Notebooks and it's really working well for you. We always are shipping new feature improvements for notebooks on a monthly basis. And if we just kind of reflect on the past year, there was a lot of great things that we added through notebooks. So let's just take a moment here and I'll share all the great things that we have in our notebooks. Over this past year, we've been really spending time as a team to really listen to all of your feedback. We brought so many different improvements in Azure Data Studio notebooks, and it's thanks to people like all of you for telling us as you're trying out these notebooks for the first time of how we can improve and how we can add new features that will help support your day-to-day work. As we look back over the last few months in terms of the agility that we're able to bring these features out to you, we really prioritize these things from things like user research studies, from emails that we exchange with you, and especially on GitHub. As you open an issue, our engineering team and our PM team are looking at all these very closely and prioritizing these things so we can make sure we have a really great experience to share with all of you. So as you can see, like some of the highlights of these experiences includes supporting additional data types like being able to support our data services like Kusto, be able to improve the editing experience with WYSIWYG editing experiences, being able to support running really large queries through either PowerShell or SQL results streaming. And it's just all these really great features. And our team is really excited to share with you over the course of this presentation of how you can start using these features that you requested for into your day-to-day workflows. And to kind of illustrate also the design journey behind these things, because they do take time and it does really involve all of you to help us make a better experience for you. So to kind of start off here, let's just kind of introduce you to how a user edits in a notebook. At the beginning of this year, many people shared with us directly there was feedback about how Markdown is confusing and people don't want to spend the time to go and learn it. And when we first shipped out an experience here, it was a bit intimidating because you had to remember that, oh, if I wanted to add a header, I have to add a £sign and say header for this query. And then you didn't really know like how this would actually look, if it would properly render. And if I typed in like there is a SQL query here, you were kind of left on your own at that point. But however, over time, as we listened to your feedback, we realized that one, we need to have side-by-side preview so that you can automatically see right away as you're writing Markdown what the changes actually reflected in the text cell that you're writing in. But in addition to that, you also want the ability to not always have to memorize Markdown all the time. So as we switch over into the split view, you can see that now we gave you the option to see as you're writing out here and be like, I have a query to share. You can see that the preview is automatically generating. This is how the cell will actually look when you are done editing the cell. And on top of that, we added this toolbar context menu that allows you to do things that you don't have to remember anymore. So let's say that you want to bold the query, or SQL query here. You can click bold, and now we add the double asterisk syntax so you don't have to go and keep looking up this syntax all the time. Or if you forgot how to highlight, then we also gave you that syntax so that you can now highlight that, and that is now reflected in the query. And this took several releases to go and add this new toolbar, add this side-by-side preview. And as much as we're kind of taking this feedback and trying to incorporate as best as we can, we thought about it a little bit more and thought about, imagine that you didn't have to know Markdown at all. Imagine that you could just work in this preview space right here, and you can almost be writing your notebooks with, all your SQL queries, all your Python code can actually be done without you having to know Markdown at all, as if you were writing like an Outlook email or a Microsoft Word document. And so that's where the journey finally brought us to WYSIWYG mode. And with WYSIWYG mode, and in here we're calling it a rich text view, basically what WYSIWYG means is what you see is what you get. But the idea here is that you don't have to know Markdown in order to do any of these things. So for example, as I start typing in here, and then let's say I just want to write in bold, I don't have to keep adding asterisks all the time. I can just be like, hey, this whole sentence is now bolded. And you see here that there's no Markdown anywhere on the screen. And then when you exit the preview of it, you already have it in the state that you're editing in. So no longer do you have to really think about the Markdown. And what's also really great about this is that we also added the extra level of intelligence where you might be asking really quick, for those of you that are familiar with notebooks, if I try to open this notebook anywhere else in the world, maybe in some of the browsers out there, wouldn't this break that experience because none of the Markdown is retained? But as you can see here, we actually are at the same time as a user is writing out their text, we're also automatically updating with Markdown and converting that text into a Markdown view so that you open this notebook anywhere else, it will still work because we're not eliminating any of the Markdown information. That on the fly, we're also updating the Markdown as you're typing here. So that's really one of the great things about this implementation that we added. In that one, as an end user, you don't have to remember any Markdown syntax anymore. And two, if you go open this notebook anywhere else, you go share it with your coworkers that are used to other notebook viewers, it won't break your experience there as well. In addition to all of these great things, we also made a really amazing copy and paste experience. So let's say that you want to go and share a GIF inside of your notebook, right? Because GIFs are very informative, and it'd be really interesting to kind of share what that would look like. So let's say I go here. Let's say that you were to go and copy a GIF from the internet, and you want to go and share this in your notebook. So if I just copy this image and paste it into my notebook, so I don't have to remember any of the syntax. Like I don't have to remember the exclamation mark or the hard brackets or the segment where I have to copy the URL to the GIF. All I have to do is just paste it here, and it automatically adds the GIF into your notebook. And on top of that, we already add all the markdown syntax for you. So now this makes it really easy to add images, to add GIFs, and all these kind of things. Now let's take this one step further. So let's say that I were to just delete everything in here, and that I wanted to instead, copy something to make a notebook really quickly. Like there's some kind of template I found online, and I want to use that instead. So let's say I go to microsoftdocs.com and take one of our quick starts for using Azure Data Studio to connect and query SQL Server. What happens if I were to copy this? So let me quickly edit this and copy from here. So if I copy from here to, and you can see there's all sorts of things here. There's images, there's different numbering, there's even a SQL code snippet here. So if I copy all this, what this would look like in like a typical notebook, if you tried to copy this, is it won't look very great. You can see here that none of the formatting is maintained. It's kind of all just lost. But if I were to then put this into rich text mode, let's see what happens. And as you can see, that images are retained, and the styling and all these kind of things are now saved with your text cell. And this is kind of the productivity, and the links are all functional, that is now available through our new WYSIWYG experience in Azure Data Studio. So we're really excited to have this feature roll out to really improve your productivity so that you can start creating these beautiful customized notebooks for your day-to-day work. In addition to that, we do have improvements in this notebooks view where you can work with all your different notebooks that you might have in your environment, and maybe even pin some that you are a big fan of. So like, for example, let's say that you really like being able to see different corgi images, right? This the purpose of this notebook. And let's say you want to pin it. Now you can always find this notebook as you keep changing directories and always have access to this pin notebook so that you can just run this all the time. So there's all these bunch of improvements that we've heard and seen through GitHub issues that eventually that we do decide to add inside of Azure Data Studio. So that makes this a really exciting tool to come and try out, because you really get control over the kind of features and have a say into what we build in the product. Now, going back to something earlier I talked about was how we're incorporating things that come from UX research. And one thing that we did was we did a study with a bunch of SQL Server DBAs and asked them to try out notebooks for the first time and kind of build out their very first notebook. And it turns out that a lot of people really want the ability to take their SQL files that they already have and be able to easily convert it into a notebook. So if I go into the SQL query, you can see that it's right now separated with a multi-line comment here explaining what the purpose of this query is. And then we also have another example of that here. So by kind of separating out the SQL file, let's say that I had a bunch of these, or at least I want to start taking one of these and convert it into a notebook, we make it as simple as adding a button that will then take this query file, add some level of intelligence to parse it, to then create your very first notebook. So instead of you having to do all the work to go and add text cells or code cells, you can now just click this button and we go and create this notebook for you. As you can see here, we have a text cell for any of those multi-line comments, and we have added code cells for anything related to an actual query itself. And that's just kind of the beauty of it, because this directly came from that UX research where every single participant was asking for a feature like this so that they could take their work and bring it over into Azure Data Studio notebooks. And we also did the extra work that, let's say you have a bunch of notebooks that you then want to convert it into a .SQL file, then we also bring that back to you as an easy option to just kind of flip between the two. And so, yeah, most of these features are available in Azure Data Studio today. Just go down the latest stable build, and you can try out all the improvements that we're bringing. We're planning to bring even more improvements into Azure Data Studio, and you'll get to see a lot more of these in just a sec. Now that I showed you SQL to notebooks, Chris, my favorite engineering manager, would you like to share any other cool things related to SQL to notebook?
Oh, so nice. Thanks, Alan. Absolutely. Let's get started. In this demo, let's take a look at how to convert SQL files into notebooks in bulk. So here we're actually going to be leveraging PowerShell for this task. We're going to be converting our SQL files into notebooks, and then I'll show you how we can view these notebooks in Azure Data Studio and how to share them so that other people can view your notebooks, which have been created into Jupyter Books as well. And we'll go through all of that in a bit. So here, we're importing two modules. We're importing the SQL Server module and the PowerShell Notebook module. Let me just run this cell. And we'll see that both of these modules have been already installed. If I wanted to install these modules to begin with, I would have uncommented these lines too. Then I'm just going to make make one directory and change to that directory. Now, I could run this git clone command right here, but it doesn't really make for a super compelling demo. So for time purposes, I've already done this beforehand. So let's go see in the Tiger toolbox, which is the Git repo that I previously cloned, how many SQL files there are. So I'm going to run this. And see, I'm going to have a number of different SQL files here. I believe the number is actually around 60. So let's see how difficult it would be to convert these into notebooks. All right. So we have this convert to SQL notebook command that we can leverage, which is something that we built and started as part of our internal hackathon. And we built the first version of this in just a few days. So let's see how this works. So basically, first, we're going to be getting all these SQL files again. And then we're just going to be calling this convert to SQL notebook just with every file name. And then we're going to be replacing the .sql with .ipynb. Should just take a couple seconds. Okay, great. So now let's go see what kind of IPYNB or notebooks that we've just generated. So if you'll see, actually the same files that were .sql files are now .ipynb files, which is pretty good. So let's go for our own sanity. Let's go and copy all these notebooks just to one directory so that we can easily take a look at these notebooks. Okay, awesome. So I previously have opened the folder that contains both the Tiger Toolbox repo and this folder that I just created. So this Outlook Notebooks folder now has all of these IPYNB files that we just generated. So if we just take a look at one of these, then you'll see that we have done some processing on the SQL files where we will look for Go as a delimiter and break up what used to be the SQL file into various code cells themselves. And so we've done all this processing for you. And so now you have these beautiful notebooks that you can run and you can share. So that is how to convert a bunch of SQL files into notebooks. Next, let's convert all of these notebooks that we just created into a Jupyter book. And let's see how easy it is to do that in Azure Data Studio. So first, I'm going to go to the Notebooks View-Lit, and I'm going to leverage the Create Book functionality that we have here. So if you'll see, we actually have a notebook that allows users to create a Jupyter book, which is a way of being able to have markdown files and notebooks in an easily consumable form in a folder format that Azure Data Studio and other viewers will be able to understand. So let's see how hard that is to do. So first, we're just going to double check that we have the required dependencies here for Jupyter book creation. So I'm just going to be running these first couple of cells. Next, we're going to be asking if you want to create with the newer version of Jupyter book and the older version of Jupyter book. We've actually created some links up here where you can make this decision on your own. For this demo, I'm going to create with the new version of Jupyter book. Okay, great. So now we know that we have the dependencies that we need, and we know that we're going to be creating a new Jupyter book of version 0.8.3 in this case for Python. So let's go and create our book that is based on the loose notebooks that we previously created. So if I just run this cell, then it's just going to ask me a couple of things. So the first thing it's going to ask me is the path where I would like my new book to be saved. So I'll just paste that in here. And next, it's going to ask me where my notebook files and markdown files currently live. So I will just paste that path in here as well. Awesome. So I can show you in just a second what just got created. So if we just look over here and we look at the My New Book in the files view here, then we'll see we still have a bunch of notebooks, IPYNB files, but we also have a couple of other things. So we have this TOC file, which has just been created, which basically says, hey, here's a table of contents that has all of our notebooks that are listed as sections. So that's fantastic. And then what we're going to be doing here is that we need to do a little bit of formatting on this TOC file just to go and clean up some book titles and directories. So I will run this. And if you actually take a peek here and you uncollapse the cell, you'll also see, and if you had a keen eye, there was a config file that actually got created as part of this as well. Note that in general, you don't need to take a look at the complexity of what the code actually looks like to leverage this Jupyter book creation process. But if you ever want to look at it, you can just go and toggle this collapse code cell. So let's also go and take a look at this config file. So the config file is very simple. And for our purposes, we're just going to look at it to say, what should the title of our new book be called that we would like to show in the notebooks viewlet? So in this case, I'm just going to call it DPS book. Very simple. So now we have this book, we have these YAML files. How do we actually go and view it in the notebooks viewlet? So let's just go and run one more cell and see what happens when we click this link. So voila, we've opened the notebooks viewlet. We've opened a book with the name that we just typed in on the config.yaml file. And notice that all of our notebooks that we just generated live right here. So we can definitely browse them. We can then get into sharing scenarios, which we'll talk about next as well. And it's very simple to go and create your own Jupyter books. Finally, let me show you how to share Jupyter books in GitHub, and then how to utilize built-in functionality in Azure Data Studio to be able to download those books on anyone's machine. Let's get started. First, I'm going to go and take a look at the folder in which my books are stored. So the first thing I need to do is that I just need to create a zip file that includes the book that I want to share. Next, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to actually change this so that the title includes both the version, which I will say is 1.1 in this case, and the language. And we'll see how this actually changes the experience that we have in Azure Data Studio in just a second. Okay, so now I have a zip file that contains the Jupyter book that we've created. Let's now upload this to GitHub as part of a GitHub release. So let's take a look at what this means. Okay, so I have this GitHub repo under my own name called DPS book. And so here, all I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to releases, and I'm going to create a new release. And so here for the release title, I'm just going to call this DPS book, and I'm going to give it a version of 1.1. Finally, all I'm going to do here is that I'm going to drag this zip file over here and wait for it to upload. And then I will be able to just click publish here. Great, so now I have this 1.1 version of the DPS book published. Let's now go take a look back in Azure Data Studio and see how I can acquire this book. Okay, great. So here I've opened the Notebooks viewlet, and I'm just going to go to this ... menu and click Add Remote Jupyter Book. So if you'll see here, we have a location preset to GitHub, and I'm just going to copy the location of my GitHub repo into this repository URL. And then I will be able to choose for a release, a book, and a version, and a language. And so notice this 1.1 version and the language, this was actually parsed out from what I titled the zip file as. And so all I need to do now is click Add. And what actually happens here is that Azure Data Studio will find the release, download the zip file, unzip the zip file, and then show that book in the Notebooks viewlet, all in one click. So using this mechanism, you can share your notebooks or Jupyter books with other people easily on GitHub.
Azure Data Studio, and especially Azure Data Studio Notebooks, wouldn't be here without SQL community contribution or SQL community feedback as well. Now, right now, I'm going to take a moment to also showcase one of the contributions from a community member. His name is Emmanuel Meazo. Hopefully I said his name properly. And essentially, he has created a SQL Server diagnostic book. Now, in Azure Data Studio, I can simply go to the extensions gallery and search for his Jupyter book extension. I think it's called SQL Server Diagnostic. Let's search for that. There you go. And this is the extension that I mentioned. So if I click install, it's going to direct me to a GitHub account where I can, or GitHub page rather, where I can download the VSIX file. So here's the SQL Server Diagnostic book as an extension. And if I scroll down a little bit, so this essentially the top part just describes what it can do. So let me just go ahead and download the VSIX file. Now that I have downloaded the VSIX file from the GitHub page, I can install it from the extensions gallery here. So let me click on the ellipsis and then click on install from VSIX. Now, if I click on the VSIX that I just downloaded, now it will start installing. Gives me some warning about third-party extension, but that's okay. Let's install it anyway. And it looks like it's completed installing the book. Now you're probably wondering, what does it do? Now, as you may already know, in Azure Data Studio, there is this way of launching the command prompt, which is Control-Shift-P. Now over here, if you start typing launch, it will show you launch book SQL Server Diagnostic Book. So by installing that extension, it allows you to launch this book from the command prompt. And when I do that, voila, on the left-hand side here, it will show all the notebooks that are available from the SQL Server Diagnostic Book. Now let's take a peek at one of the notebook from the diagnostic book. Let's take a look at Glenberry's diagnostic scripts. If I click on that, it will start loading. It's taking a little bit of time. There we go. So now we have Azure SQL Database Diagnostic Information Queries, nicely formatted with all the code. At the moment it's collapsed, but you can expand it obviously. So there you go. A community contribution to a Jupyter Book extension that you can launch from Azure Data Studio for your benefits.
From these past demos, you have now seen notebooks for documentation as well as for collaboration. For this next segment, we want to think about how do we use notebooks to help improve user experiences. And one in particular is through deploying Azure Data Services. And I heard, Julie, you might have something to share with us.
Indeed, I do. I actually have a quick demo on how to deploy Azure or an Azure SQL database using a notebook. And it's actually one of my favorite ones because it's just super easy to use. Check this out.
In the Connections viewer, there is a menu here that is called New Deployment. Now, from time to time, as a SQL user, I do need to be able to create a SQL resource much more easily and more kind of reliable or reproducible, essentially. So I tend to use this new deployment UI. It's very interactive and it's very easy to use. So in this specific demo, I'm actually going to create a new database inside my Azure SQL Server. So let me go ahead and click on the new deployment. And from here, there are a few different options. So the ones that I want to use is actually the Azure SQL. Now, if I scroll down a little bit, it will ask me a couple of things. So let me just click on the I accept the privacy statement, and then it asks me to provide a resource type that I want to create. So single database, elastic pool, or database server. For the purpose of this demo, I'm just going to create a single database to my existing Azure SQL Server. So let me click on the script to notebook here. So in this dialog, I simply need to provide Azure account subscription and the server where I want to create the database. And what's really good about this user interface is if you already have a linked account to your Azure Data Studio, it will just pick up that Azure account from there directly. So now let me go and click next. And it will ask me a couple of things. So as an example, SQL database name and all the details that I need to provide. So let me type that up. Now that I have all the details filled in, I can just simply click next. And it provides me with a summary of what I'm going to deploy. And then now I can click on script to notebook. Okay, so this is the notebook that actually got created from that UI earlier, which is super useful. Now, before I run all on this script, let me show you what my portal looks like, my Azure portal, where I actually have displayed the list of databases on my Azure SQL Server. So my Azure SQL database server. So at the moment, I only have testDB. So what I'm going to do is click run all. So this is going to take a couple of minutes. Now it looks like it's finished executing. So I'm going to head back to portal.azure.com with my account. All right, and there it is. My DPS demo DB has already been created to my Azure SQL Server, which is great.
Next, let's talk about notebooks for operationalization. Our users have shared the importance of automating their workflows, and notebooks can power these workflows through features like parameterization. Now, let's invite Vasu, who is going to demo Python parameterization.
Hi, and thanks, Alan. My name is Vasu Bog, and I'm a software engineer on the SQL Tools and Experience team in Azure Data. I'm incredibly excited to share with you our new release experience of parameterization of notebooks in Azure Data Studio. This demo will showcase how anyone can parameterize a notebook inside ADS. This notebook specifically is a simple use case of parameterization using PaperMill. So our first cell here indicates our variables that we will utilize for our parameterization. Our first cell we will want to make sure is a parameter cell. So we're going to use the cell toolbar toggle and make it a parameter cell here. We're going to make sure we save that. And now we can run this notebook as well in order to see the manipulation that we do. So here, clearly, we just do an addition and multiplication, and we print those results as is. So now we're going to utilize PaperMill to parameterize our notebook here. So I'm going to use PaperMill's command line interface. And what you do is state PaperMill, and then the input notebook, and then the output notebook that you want to name, any one that you want to name regardless. So here I'm going to do a p tag, which references a parameter tag. And so now we're going to change x to 10. And we're also going to introduce another one for y for 20. And so now we're going to execute PaperMill to parameterize our new notebook for our new injected parameters. So you can see it quickly outputted that. And we'll be able to see this clearly here, our new parameterization notebook. And you can clearly see the new variables and their values and the new executed results. So its addition is 30, multiplication is 20, and those are based off our new injected parameters. So this is how we can easily identify parameterization within Azure Data Studio, and how anyone can go ahead and utilize parameters tag to parameterize their notebooks using the open source community of PaperMill, alongside many different PaperMill parameterization stories that we have within Azure Data Studio. Thank you, guys.
Hey Fasid, that is really good. So I think that gave me an idea for Python, KQL Magic, and parameterization. This is pretty awesome.
Yeah, that sounds awesome, Julie. I'm excited to see what you use parameterization in KQL Magic.
Okay, awesome. Let me give this a go and I'll share it to you after. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thanks, Julie. See ya.
Bye.
If you're familiar with Python, which is actually not too hard to pick up, and if you are also using Kusto Query Language or KQL today, you might be interested in installing a package called KQL Magic. Now, in Azure Data Studio, it's actually pretty simple in terms of installation, KQL Magic installation. Now, I actually already have it installed. The way I check it is go to the Manage Packages and then, essentially browse and see if I could find KQL Magic here. So I have it installed, so I'm not going to install again. But for those who are new to KQL Magic and you want to install it, simply go to Add New and then search KQL Magic, and it should display a number of versions. Now make sure that you use the non-dev version, because the dev version is still under development. So what I have is actually the post one. So you can click install. I'm going to skip the installation since I already have it installed. Once you have it installed, it's actually pretty straightforward to use it. So simply type in %reload extension and then KQL Magic like this. And this will load KQL Magic to your environment or to your session, right? And it gives the nice banner, so that way you can, get some help or read more about KQL Magic. So let me paste the connection string that I previously set up before. So this is actually connecting to the help cluster of Azure Data Explorer. So let's give it a go and run it. And if you scroll down a little bit, it will ask you to copy this code and then click on the button to authenticate. Now, you can only authenticate or access the Azure Data Explorer cluster, the help cluster, if you have Azure account. So let me just go ahead and then sign into my account. Now, once that's done, you should be able to be successfully authenticated. And there is this new button called Pop-up Schema Samples at Help. So if you click on that, let me just press here. Now it will give me the content of that help cluster, or the schema of that help cluster, especially the samples database. So since I'm connected to the samples database. So the table that I'm interested in querying today is the storm events. So let's take a look. Let's go back here and create a new code cell and type in storm events and then take 10 and see what that looks like. Oops. Of course, it's not going to work because with KQL magic, you will need to put percentage KQL or percentage KQL for multi-line. Now that looks so much better. So from here, let me just show the code a little bit. So from here, I'm actually just, querying the storm events table and then taking the first, 10 rows of the data set. And it will display the table quite nicely, which is good. And yeah, so that's a basic introduction to KQL magic. Now, to kind of showcase the more sort of advanced or intermediate use cases of KQL magic is this query here. So let me just run this. So this query here is actually just summarizing the count by state in the storm events table and then sort it by count and just show the first 10. Now, obviously with notebooks, it's super, easy to create a chart. So for example, if you, click on the chart button and click on configure chart, you should be able to visualize that data set. So let me just scroll down a little bit here. So very nice. Now, if you want slightly more advanced sort of visualization, you can also use the render keyword in KQL. So if I run this, which actually has already pre-run, but I'll run it again anyway. So this is essentially visualizing the storm events time chart or timeline. And the visualization is actually passed through to Python Plotly package, which is kind of nice because it allows you to do more interactive analysis. So as an example, I can drag my mouse and it will actually zoom in a little bit more on the kind of like timeline. And if I want to go back home, simply reset axis and voila, I'm back to the kind of normal timeline axis. Okay, this demo here is actually putting together a couple of pieces that you've learned earlier. The first one is KQL magic, and then the next one is parameterized notebook. Now I'm going to put it together such that it will execute an existing notebook that connects to Log Analytics workspace that monitors an Azure SQL database server. So I know it's quite complicated, but it's actually not really. It's actually very powerful too. Now let me scroll down to the parameterized cell. So remember from what Fasu explained earlier that in a notebook now you can define a parameterized cell. So that's from the ellipsis and then mark parameter cell. And you can see that I've already done that here. So over here, in this specific scenario, what I'm doing here is extracting the log analytics connection detail from a file, which is a txt file here. And then for debugging purposes, you can set this to Y for yes, whether you want to display the connection details. So because some of this is kind of sensitive because it's client secrets and all that kind of stuff, it's part of the connection string. So I'm putting this as a N or no. And I can provide an alias to the log analytics connection. That's just kind of, make it easier to refer to or to remember. And then the Azure SQL database server that I want to connect to, which is this one here. All right, so if I scroll down a little bit more, essentially the next step is really just reading from the file, the connection details from the file, and then connecting to KQL magic, which you've already seen before. And then this is connecting to the Log Analytics workspace. And let me scroll down a little bit more here. Now, this is the real example where it's actually getting 10 rows from the Azure diagnostic tables with some filters. So it's pretty useful there. And then over here, it will create a time chart. And the last one is just summarizing the action name from the Azure diagnostics table. Now, to be able to run this parameterized notebook, you can use Papermill. But in my scenario, since I really like using notebooks because it helps me kind of like save and document things, I actually have created a parameterized notebook execution notebook. It can be a bit mouthful there. So let me just scroll a little bit up here. So this is just a demo of executing a notebook using Papermill. Now, in this code here, in this code cell here, I have defined my input notebook, so the notebook that I actually want to execute that has the parameter cell, and then what I want to save the executed notebook as. So I have the output in front of it, that way I remember. And then next, I'm just simply running using Papermill. So this is the input notebook, output notebook. Now over here, you'll see where the parameters are defined. Whatever that you're providing here will be passed to the input notebook. So over here, I've got the path to the log analytics connection details and more. So let me just click execute. It's going to take a little bit of time, but not too long. So it's just continue progressing. We'll have to wait until it's finished executing 100%. Okay, looks like it's done. It doesn't take too long after all. Now let me go to the File Explorer and open the output notebook file. Here's the output notebook file. Now let's scroll down a little bit. You should expect a couple of things. One of them is the injected parameter cell, and the rest would be related to the execution output of the cells. So let's scroll down. So you should see immediately under the parameter cell here, I've got the injected parameters. So that's what we used earlier when we execute from the execute notebook. And the next few ones, these should be executed. So looks like all the cells are executed. And this is the interesting stuff. So this is where the KQL queries are executed. It should provide some output, which it did. So that's great. And then the next one should be time charge on the Azure Diagnostics table. So let's scroll down a little bit more. Here we go. So that's quite nice. And then the last but not least, it's the summarization of the action name from the Azure Diagnostics table. So here we go. And that's it. We managed to string together a parameterized notebook that uses KQL Magic to connect to a log analytics workspace using client secret. And the log analytics workspace actually stores an Azure SQL database event. So that's pretty powerful.
Finally, our fifth scenario are notebooks for data workflows. This is the most common scenario for notebooks and includes being able to support all types of data services.
Yeah, and one of them is actually native Custo query language support in notebooks in Azure Data Studio. So let me grab Monica to help out with the demo here. Okay, let's invite Monica, who's going to talk about KQL or Custo query language using notebooks in Azure Data Studio.
Hi, my name is Monica, and I'm a dev in SQL Tools team. Today, I'm going to demo native Custo support in Azure Data Studio and show how you can use Custo query language in ADS notebooks. So I have my Azure Data Studio open here, and let's get started. So on the top left, you can see there is an option to add a new connection over here. If I click on that, you can change it to Azure Data Explorer, which is Custo. And we can start typing any cluster here like help.custo.windows.net. If I hit connect here, I'm going to get connected and see this on the left hand side. Since I already have this, I'm going to hit cancel. And if I click on this expand button, I can navigate through all the databases and tables in this particular cluster. So you can see this is the DB we have, samples DB in here. If I click on that, I can see all the tables and functions inside it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on the samples GB, and you can see multiple options. Here today we are going to show how you can use notebooks and Kusto language in that. So if I click new notebook, you can see it's already connected to the right kernel, which is Kusto, and the right cluster and DB, samples GB. Now what we can do here is we can just click on the code cell, I would like to query this particular table. So I start typing storm event, and you can see the autocomplete suggestion gives us the KQL intelligence. And if I click on that, suppose I would like to summarize the sum of damage crops by state, and I'm going to sort it, get the top 5. So see how easy it was to write the query with the IntelliSense. And if I hit run, it's going to query the Kusto cluster. Now I can see this data in tabular format. If I click on, we can also utilize the charting capability of Azure Data Studio. So if I click on this chart view and go and configure this to vertical, so we can see the bar chart here as well, and results in this format too. Also, there are other options like you can always port the results as JSON or CSV file. So if I hit click on this, it's gonna ask you to, it's gonna save the results in that format. We can do that as well. There's one more thing which I would like to show. It's a join query to a different cluster. I already have a notebook saved. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my notebook. So here, yeah, I'm going to connect it to the right cluster. I'm going to connect to help cluster and database samples. So here what you can see is the first line says that it's getting me the state population table from my CustoDB and this particular cluster. So what I'm doing is I'm getting the top 3 rows by population from this particular table and going to join it with our storm events table to get the sum of damage crops by state in the places where the population is highest. So if I hit run here, I'm going to see results in that format. So what we can achieve here is we can query multiple clusters here in a single notebooks and join it with the table and create meaningful results. So that's it from me. Back to you, Julie.
What a journey. What I really love about Notebook is how much we focus on customer experiences.
I totally agree, Julie. For us, it's not just enough to just create a great experience, but we want to make sure we create lovable experiences. And we want this to be shown through across all of our notebook work streams and scenarios as well. So whether that means notebooks as UX, notebooks as documentation, all these areas we definitely want to be checking back with our community of users to ask you whether these experiences are actually lovable for you. And if you want to find more ways to get involved with all the great things you've seen here with Azure Data Studio notebooks, be sure to check out our project on GitHub, as you can see in the link provided. You can also check out our documentation at ak.ms/ads notebooks. Or finally, you can get involved by following us on Twitter and following at Azure Data Studio. And always feel free to send any questions or any issues you might find. And our team is very responsive to those things.
All right, and I think that's a wrap. Thank you so much for joining this session. We really love talking about Azure Data Studio Notebooks to you. So hopefully you get the chance to check this out and also share your experiences or your use cases with notebooks. And also don't forget to leave feedback to us too. All right, that's it from us now. See you.